Hello, this is conversation time. This is time to sit back and relax. I hope you have a cup of coffee if that's what you need. And just enjoy the conversation. Come enter in, think about this from your own perspective. And today we have as our partner Matthew Wollam-Berens, who is the chaplain at Porter. And Matt, would you like to kind of tell us, how did you get here?
Sure.
What happened before that brought you into this community?
It's kind of a long journey. I don't know if I told you I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and grew up Roman Catholic, went to Roman Catholic Seminary College there, Pontifical College Josephinum. After college, decided that wasn't going to be my route to become a priest. Ended up moving out with my fiance to Lincoln, Nebraska. Worked for a Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company between there and Detroit, Michigan for about 26 years with the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. Ended up in Michigan about the time the economy cratered in around 2009. By that time, I'd already started seminary studies again to become a chaplain. And so I took my first unit of what they call clinical pastoral education, sort of like a chaplaincy internship in the Detroit, Michigan area. Did a unit there. We moved out to Plattsburgh, New York area when my wife found a job out there because she'd gotten laid off, same as I had from Goodyear. She got hired on at Nova Bus at the time there, got laid off at Nova Bus, which brought her to Virgins at what was then Goodrich, now United Technologies. And so that's actually what brought us to Vermont, was her doing that. And then I was in seminary at the time. So I was kind of all over the place. I was a part-time chaplain for a while at UVM Medical Center, half-time pastor over at Post Mills Congregational Church, before I got hired on here at Porter, December 2015. So that's kind of
quite a journey.
Yeah, pretty interesting.
We focus on stories, but basically we focus on life. And so thank you for sharing your story. As you look back over what you just said, what part did stories play in that? What stories come to mind as you think back on that list of where you were and how you got from there? And any just kind of emerge?
There's just so many. I was thinking, just about my experiences in the Roman Catholic Seminary, Pontifical College Josephinum, great teachers, your small college of about 120 guys, and, your classroom size is 10, 15 people, so you've got all these professors sitting there with just a few guys, so great education there, and so I have lots of good memories of that. Lots of memories out in Lincoln, Nebraska, stories from when I was in the union. I started out as a union laborer there, and really gave me into a lot of insights into labor issues and unfortunately, mistreatment of workers by some of the very people who used to do those jobs who became supervisors. So, so I had lots of memories of that working in the union there, which I've really appreciated over the years and all the different places I've been, because it's given me a lot of insights into a wide variety of situations and people. So to have been working in a union was really neat to see that sort of life that I hadn't been exposed to before.
Going from a seminary school to a labor union, that was quite a... Did you see that as a flip-flop, or or was it a gradual opening up of a story?
No, that's a good question. After I graduated from college seminary, I was kind of floundering around trying to figure out what to do with what I felt was a call in my life, but really had no sense of direction on where I would go with that. And so immediately after college, I'd worked in a homeless shelter for a while. At the same time, I was working part-time in a bar, so that was kind of an interesting situation to go from working in a bar at day to being in a homeless shelter at night. So I was still trying to find ways to use that. my fiance and I originally went out to Nebraska to become graduate students in family therapy and counseling at University of Nebraska. And in the meantime, we were working at Goodyear to get by, and it was really nice to actually be making some nice money for a change.
Yes.
Union paid well, which is great. And it's just one of those, life kind of takes you in funny places sometimes. And next thing you know, you've kind of drifted off a number of years down that route with Goodyear. So yeah, it wasn't even necessarily a well thought out thing. It was just kind of drifting along with life. And
so okay, so it was moving from one place to another. And what was it that brought you back to the possibility of chaplaincy?
Well, that still kind of was always smoldering under the surface, never went out. So I was still looking for outlets on how to use that. For a lot of years, I'd stopped going to church at all. It just, I think like a lot of people, the institutional part of church wasn't speaking to me, but I was still looking for spirituality. And so I got involved with different groups and finally found a form of meditation, a sort of Christian meditation that made sense to me. And so I was practicing that one day, and was kind of the words I was focusing on. Some people would say a mantra, but it's not quite that same idea, but just words to focus on. And I was using words from the Lord's Prayer, on earth as it is in heaven. And I would just return to those words, and my thoughts would start up again, and then just sit in silence and just basically enjoy what felt like the presence of God. And then I'd just drop one little pebble into the still water, which was the idea was, is there anything I could be doing to make it more on earth as it is in heaven? And so I was doing that for a few months back around 1999 and had a mystical experience, I guess would be the best way you could put it. And just this overwhelming sense of God's peace and presence, more so than I've ever felt before in my life. And I've felt it several times very strongly, but by far that was the strongest. And somehow I knew that I was going to take up the harp and begin volunteering with it in nursing homes and hospitals for hospice patients. And as I've described it over time, you think about that and try to, how do you describe that experience? And the only thing I can compare it to, there's a story in the Bible where Jesus heals a man that's been paralyzed for 38 years. And Jesus just says to him, get up, pick up your mat, and go home. And it was something like that. It was some almost like, not like I heard a voice, but somebody just saying, Matt, pick up the harp, start playing it, and go volunteer. And so I did. And that's what led to me becoming a chaplain, because then I'm going into nursing homes and hospice situations with my harp and playing for people as they're dying or ill. And
but why the harp? Have you figured that out?
No. Yeah. I mean,
mystery.
Yeah, I'd never played an instrument before.
Okay.
And I always say I don't claim to be a musician. I don't read music. I'm playing for a specific purpose. And there's something about harp music that seems to bring out an innate sense of spirituality in people, even though I'm not, the world's best musician on that. There's something about the harp.
I've heard you play, and I like it.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds good, but like I say, I'm not a musician by any means, but I think just the fact that there's somebody there playing an instrument like the harp, just the fact that, even seeing the harp, a lot of people are like, oh, wow,
right.
That's, and then they hear it and they, you can play something fairly simple on the harp. And, if I'm playing it here with you in a room, feeling those vibrations, it's a very personal experience.
So you think there's a connection, a story that comes sometimes from people when they, just by seeing the harp and hearing the harp?
Yeah, great conversation starter, icebreaker.
What kind of things might they say without being personal?
I guess I'm always amazed people tell you about their life stories. I mean, I go in a room and, especially for the first few years, I'm usually a pretty quiet guy. And so going into knocking on somebody's door, it's a complete stranger, took me a while to get used to doing that. And I was always and still always amazed that people share so much of their life story with you. And I don't know if it's because of the badge or the harp or some combination, but people really seem to want to tell their stories. And I think especially in those situations, maybe people are thinking about their mortality a little bit, re-examining their life. They have a chance to step back from their life. It's quiet, it's sort of an enforced quiet, and maybe they're thinking about their stories in new ways, and so maybe it's on their minds. But people share a lot of very interesting stories, very powerful. So I always feel privileged that way, that to be in a lot of intimate situations, with very private information that, and people have a real need to share it. You can tell it just kind of comes pouring out. And
what happens if they don't share their story? How does that impact? If they're silent, quiet?
Yeah.
What does that imply for you, or what does that mean?
Yeah. I mean, there's 1,000 reasons why somebody may not feel particularly like speaking at that point. Sometimes somebody's in a lot of pain. You don't know who's just been in the room prior to them. They may just be a private person like me. I wouldn't personally be inclined to share a lot of my life story with a chaplain that came in the room. I'm just not geared that way. So, I mean, there's lots of reasons why somebody may not want to share their story at any given time. And just personalities. I may not be a personality that connects well with them. And
so there's it's not just the story, or the storyteller. It's just all kinds of things that you just don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of variables.
Which puts you in a place where you're caught up with mystery too, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. And sometimes you can sense that, and you can start nibbling around the edges to, maybe help somebody to. You can tell or sense that they're wanting to share a story, but don't know quite how to get to it. And especially in a lot of end-of-life situations, people have had a lot of interesting mystical experiences, and you can tell they're wanting to share that, but they're not quite sure whether to trust you. And so I might introduce something such as saying, a lot of people in your situation have had a lot of interesting experiences at the end of life, spiritual experiences, and just kind of let it hang there and see if somebody responds to that or not.
Right. And they might come back to that later, right?
Right.
Because they're really going to test it out.
Right.
As to whether or not that's something they want to do in terms of telling story, and that's something whether you are a safe person.
Right.
Say something about safety in stories. From your experience.
Well, I guess that's one of the things that always surprises me, that only because people have told me this, it just wouldn't have occurred to me that sometimes people will find me a safe person to say these stories to. Because, like I say, it just amazes me, the stories that you will hear and that people will share. And like I say, I feel incredibly blessed and privileged to be able to hear some of those stories, because there's really some amazing things that that you hear.
Yeah, and sometimes it becomes hard for people to tell stories because they live in a situation where it's not encouraged.
Right. Oh yeah, and I notice that especially with men, I think, in our culture. Yet, I have to do a little more priming sometimes, that they're not as vocal a lot of times, and and
do you find anybody who wants to tell jokes?
Oh yeah.
So how does that come?
Well, that can be a lot of fun, but you always kind of wonder sometimes if somebody's jokes, it's like just kind of on that surface level, and may not be wanting to deal real heavily with what's going on with them at that point, which is fine. I mean, because jokes can be a great way of, humor is just a great way to deal with things sometimes, and sometimes all you can do is laugh at a situation, and so it can be very healing, or sometimes it can be kind of a cover for not dealing with.
Right.
So you kind of get a sense of that as.
But you're available.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I don't come in with any agenda. Like if I would bring up something about, have you had any spiritual experiences, that'd be way into a conversation.
Right.
I would say, probably 60% of the people I visit, I never bring up religion at all, or prayer or anything, because I'm really taking my cues from them and what their needs are. it doesn't make any difference to me whether they're religious or not. I'm there for them. So I really take my cues from them, and it's what they want to talk about and what's meaningful for them at that point. Because you never know what you're catching somebody in the middle of as you're walking into a room. You don't know what conversation they've just had with a doctor or their family. Or
So talk a little bit about your work in general. I mean, like what would be, I'm sure there's no average day, right?
No, not really. There's just a few things that are set for meetings and things, but typically I'll get to the hospital around 7:45 over at Porter Hospital. They have a morning meeting there at 8 o'clock, just a quick huddle of the department managers. And one thing that evolved over time, just somebody suggested it to me, was to have me lead a moment of centering every morning. So every morning as the department managers gather, I do just a few-minute centering moment where we're all recalling what we're there to do, work on behalf of the patients and the families. And so I'll say something along the lines of just recalling that we're here for the health, healing, and wholeness of the patients in mind, body, and spirit, each as we work in our respective spheres, and have a moment of silence.
And do you find that that's readily accepted?
I was surprised that it was, yeah. In fact, when I'm not there on days I'm off, people say, "Oh, we missed you. We really missed when we have those centering things. It's not the same if you're not leading it." And yeah, which surprised me that. And I'm very careful to be neutral. I'm not, bringing it into specifically religious context, but more, centering on the work that we're there to do. And I know people at first were a little nervous about that. So, they didn't know how I was going to approach that, if I was going to approach it from a religious standpoint, from my denominational standpoint. But yeah, once they realized I wasn't, then...
So it becomes a broad focus on life and the possibility of death.
Yeah.
And the question of pain and all of those things without implying any particular direction on any of those, right?
Right.
Yeah. So what's the rest of the day sort of like?
Sure.
Just, like.
Well, after that, and that's just quick 5 or 10 minutes, I'll go start making rounds at the hospital, visit patients in the rooms there, sometimes at the birthing center too. That just depends. I always bring my harp every day, wheel it around with me usually. So sometimes I might play for a half hour in the birthing center, and parents always love that. Sometimes they'll bring their newborns out, and that's really fun because they want their newborns to hear the music. So
people who are watching this, they're probably asking this question: well, how big is this harp?
Yeah, people always have a lot of questions.
Can you give them a sense of, is this a really big harp or a small harp?
Not quite a full concert one, but it's about 5 foot tall pedal harp.
Okay.
So it's pretty good. It's pretty good sized.
Okay.
Yeah, 40 strings, and the concert harp would have 7 more. But for what I do, that would be kind of wasted because I'm not playing concert level. So between the highest and lowest string, it's plenty.
Yeah. So, do people give requests?
Oh yeah, yeah.
So what kind of songs do you get as requests?
Oh, if somebody's like specifically Christian, they might ask for something like the Old Rugged Cross or Amazing Grace.
Right. Or they might ask for...
sometimes I'll learn songs. Somebody will suggest something. There was a Irish tune called Wild Mountain Thyme that I'd never heard of before, so I learned that. It's one that somebody really liked. So it just depends.
You pick that up rather quickly?
It takes me a while to pick it out, because I have to pick it out. And that one I had to go listen to. It wasn't one I'd ever heard before, so I just get a YouTube video of it, or hear it on iTunes or something, and then just pick it out on the harp. And so it'll take me a week or so practice before I'd want to play it in front of somebody. But, yeah.
Then you go back and say, I got this song for you, right?
Yeah. And then after that, I do another centering over at Helen Porter at 9 o'clock in the morning. So then I head over to Helen Porter and make visits and rounds, and then the rest of the day is just going back and forth between both places.
Just say a little bit about the difference between the two places, because we don't know who's watching this and
Sure.
and what they do know and don't know
Yeah.
about these two places.
Yeah. Hospital's a small community hospital, so it's got a birthing center with, I think, maybe 7 or 8 rooms in it. 25 some beds in the hospital, an emergency room. So, pretty much all the standard hospital things. Helen Porter is a combination of rehab, long-term care, what some people would call a nursing home, and then also a memory care unit. So people with things like Alzheimer's and dementia. So a little bit of mixture of everything. And over there, they've got about 105 beds, I think, at Helen Porter. And occasionally I'll end up at one of the Porter practices, maybe in Virgins or Bristol, one of the ones here in town, if there's been some crisis that comes up.
What's a Porter practice?
Oh, it'd be like one of the doctor's offices.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's how many of those?
I don't know the total number.
I think it's
Bristol,
12,
Virgins. You've got Addison County Family Health Practices, and there's the Neshabie Clinic and Brandon.
Yeah.
So yeah, pretty scattered out. Yeah. Plus the ones they've got in the Middlebury area, pediatrics, and yeah. So it keeps me busy.
And what about emergencies? How does that work for you?
Yeah, I have a pager, and so if there's a crisis in the emergency room, like somebody's had what they call a code 99 or perhaps a cardiac event, they'll page me in for that if the family's wanting a chaplain, and they ask. I don't just show up, but yeah.
And so you're in and out of the hospital and Porter and the practices on a regular basis, right?
Yeah.
Or when they call you, or
yeah, the practices are much more rare because that's more a specific situation. But so it's usually Helen Porter in the hospital. Yeah.
Yeah. So, chaplain. Tell me about the word chaplain. Is it the word? Were you specifically trained for the chaplaincy, or is chaplain one word among many?
Yeah, that
you could use to describe who you are.
Yeah. Chaplain's sort of an evolving profession, and so for a lot of years, chaplain was sort of loosely used as anybody that would talk to people in sort of a religious or spiritual context. So there might be somebody at a college that would be called a chaplain that was maybe more sort of a counselor, and it's been evolving over time to be more of a profession. So nowadays, chaplain would be something you would get after a certification, and so it's kind of still being used both ways. So it's one of those words, when you say chaplain, there's a lot of people using it in different ways with different backgrounds, different educational backgrounds. But what I have, was specifically training for a chaplaincy. And so the unit of clinical pastoral education I'd mentioned I'd done in Detroit, Michigan area, I had 3 more after that, which is one of the requirements for certification to have 4 of those units. And yeah.
So it doesn't. It's not quite the same as a person who's going to be pastor of a local congregation.
Right. Yeah, more specific in my situation to a hospital setting.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so all my training and my internships were all in hospital settings.
And you like the hospital?
I like the people in the hospital. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And hospitals. And you've been in how many hospitals now?
I don't know. There weren't too many to keep track of.
Too many to keep track of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, between Nebraska, Michigan, here, New York. Yeah.
Okay. If you, in terms of the storytelling, do you find that is both with patients and with people, the workers?
Staff. Yeah, and actually, it's easy to overlook the staff, but with Porter, I think there's 800 some staff members. So yeah, there's a lot of work with the staff too, And not just that, but families of patients, especially especially at the end of life. It's not so much the patient who a lot of times is beyond the point of being able to have a conversation to talk about his story, but the family is sharing a lot of stories, and so a lot of the work's with the family. Yeah.
Do you get connected to hospice as well?
Yeah. Yeah, I do different projects. I'm on the Hospice Volunteer Services. They have an end-of-life committee that I work with, yeah. And I'm kind of loosely connected. I'll do some volunteering, like at Project Independence.
Right.
Yeah, some of the senior work, do a little bit every once in a while with CSAC, with Atchison County
the counseling
service. Yeah.
So there's a wide variety of of connections.
Yeah, makes it a lot of fun. Yeah, to really feel connected to the community, and yeah. Yeah, so it's almost more like, in some senses, being a community chaplain, because there's a lot of flow back and forth between the hospital and all sorts of other things. Like there's somebody at Helen Porter right now. Her daughter is a pastor at a local congregation. She wanted to spend a birthday with her mother, and so I filled in for her at church on one Sunday, so that day she could have with her mother. So there's a lot of back and forth things like that makes it kind of fun to.
Well, it's great to belong to a community where where there are connections.
Yeah.
And where people are supportive of each other.
Yeah.
And they think that everything is all one.
Yeah. And Middlebury is a great community. It's yeah, I've been very happy to see what a great community people have here, and the level of caring with neighbors and yeah. And then just making connections. Sometimes what I do is helping people make connections with something else that would be helpful to them. There's a woman that was in one time in the hospital, and she had fallen and hurt her leg, and she needed a ride home, didn't have anybody to give her a ride home. And so I gave her a ride home, and I get to her home, and I find out the reason she fell is she had no railing on her second floor bedroom. And so I arranged for a pastor at a local church to have some volunteers went in and put up a railing for her. You know, so just those kind of things are a lot of fun, to be able to make connections where not just at the hospital, but even extending into their lives at home, things where you can just be of help in basic ways that hopefully she won't end up in the hospital again, because she has that railing now. And
so it's a kind of a amazing and rich life, isn't it? Because on the one hand, you're dealing with people, and in the process of this happening, there are stories that get exchanged, and on the other hand, you're working with groups, and in the process of being a group, there's stories that get exchanged, and yet, so some of these are funny stories that are perfectly all right to share because they've been shared and they are affirming.
Yeah.
Others, they're kind of a gift to you.
Oh yeah.
They you don't share because they belong to the person who said, and they really shared it only out of the sense of safety.
Right.
That they were really safe and comfortable with you. Well, you know, that's incredible.
Yeah.
That, when you think about it that way, that there's a richness there that you can kind of draw on and draw in.
Yeah.
But there's a richness that you can, in some cases, share, but you always have to use your good judgment.
Yeah.
In that whole process, right?
Yeah, I always wish I could share more stories than I can, because there's so many amazing ones that people share that, you know, and every once in a while, if there's been one I really love to share with somebody, I've got a few like that where I've asked them, can I share this with other people? Because that would be very meaningful. And I have done that, and there's some that I've used in sermons in different ways.
And they give you permission.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that was really helpful for me to understand confidentiality was a teacher I had who just simply said, remember, if someone shares something with you, says something to you, it doesn't belong to you.
Yeah.
It still belongs to that person.
And even if they give me permission, I may not want to tell it.
That's right.
Yeah.
And if you don't give your permission, that's the whole basis of the starting of spreading of gossip.
Yeah.
You know, because we really shouldn't be telling those kind of things.
Yeah. And I take that pretty seriously. I mean, the last thing you'd want would be to get to a point where people won't trust other chaplains or just other people in general because you abused somebody's trust. Yeah.
Hey, thank you. This has been a lot of fun and very helpful and very insightful. I hope people get to hear you play your harp, because I've always enjoyed it all the time, and we're very glad that you're in the community.
Oh, glad to be
at
here.
Porter, and so we thank you for this conversation.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay. All right, folks. Have a good day. Remember, your story matters.